live.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are right now. Welcome to TME Presents, Partnering to Success. You've read the article. Now learn the rest of the story. I'm Daniel Wheatley, Associate Editor for the Military Engineer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to best participate in today's event. All the attendees are in a listen-only mode for the presentation, but you can use the chat pane to chat with your fellow attendees. Everyone, let's try that now by typing in where we're all listening from today. For me, I'm out in Northern Virginia. You can submit questions for the presenters at any time by using the questions pane of the control panel. We will collect these and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And please also submit any technical issues you may be encountering here as well. You'll be able to download your PDH certificate and a copy of the slide deck from the Handouts tab once we begin the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Originally published in the November-December 2021 issue of TME, Partnering to Success discussed the delivery of a design for a multi-facility reception complex for Fort Jackson. As part of an improvement program to remedy its 1970s-era infrastructure, Fort Jackson required a new multi-facility reception complex that included reception processing centers, a medical and dental clinic, barracks for 300 enlistees, an optical fabrication laboratory, a telecommunications building, and a physical training track. In delivering this project, the team needed to navigate a reprogrammed project scope, late-stage design changes, and lead certification requirements. And to do so, they leveraged strong and effective partnering between the design team and a long list of stakeholders. I would now like to introduce the article's original authors and today's featured speakers. Pam Little is the program manager for the Army program at Pond, a licensed civil engineer in the states of Georgia and Florida, and a certified project management professional. Pam has 22 years of experience in engineering and construction project management, with key roles on projects ranging from less than $1 million to over $500 million in total project cost. Chad Saleeby is senior architect, also with Pond. Chad has 17 years of experience in the architecture industry and has been involved in all aspects of design, including site investigations, programming, design development, BIM and rendering, construction documents, lead administration, and construction administration. And Anna Dis Sveinbjornsdottir is Principal Director of Interior Design at Pond. Anna has over 18 years of experience as an interior designer, specializing in designing facilities for the government, hospitality, commercial interiors, and higher education, and has led the team of interior designers for Pond since 2016. With that, I'll turn it over to our featured speakers for their presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate that kind and welcoming introduction. We are also excited to be here with all of you today to talk about some of the keys to what we feel are the keys to our success on this large design project, the Reception Battalion Complex at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. But before we get started on the presentation, you all have heard a little bit about us. Now we'd like to know a little bit about you. So we have a poll question up. If you could respond, we'd like to know what sector of the market you're in, whether you're a small business, we're classifying that as less than 100 people, or classified as a small business under at least one NAICS code. Medium business between 100 and 2,500 people, large business over 2,500, government, military, government, civilian, or nonprofit. All right, it looks like the majority of our listeners today work for medium businesses, so likely businesses similar to Pond in size. We also have some large business, small business, and government folks in the audience. So welcome, everyone. what we're going to be discussing today is the Fort Jackson Reception Battalion Complex. So we are going to have a little overview of that project so you understand what it was and what its importance is to the military, and why we're so excited to work on this important project. We're also going to talk about how partnering worked on this project. Many of you probably know that the Corps of Engineers considers partnering to be a key to their success on their projects. And as part of that Corps of Engineers philosophy on partnering, they talk a lot about the 3 C's. And those 3 C's are collaboration, commitment, and communication. So we absolutely feel that those 3 things helped us to get to a successful design on this project. And we'll talk about each of those and how it helped us navigate some of the challenges that we faced and gave us some opportunities to really improve this project. So we'll talk a little bit about how we communicated to understand the stakeholder needs. Big part of communication is listening. And without effective listening, you're not going to know what your users need that facility for, what the importance is. So we felt that it was really important to ask questions and then to listen to what they had to say so that we were able to implement the right scope. And part of that communication process led us to revising the scope. And this project actually did need to be reprogrammed after it was started. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Another big important part of this project was that the functionality that's currently served by the existing buildings had to continue. It's not something that they can stop, so it's gotta be able to continue throughout construction. So there's a lot of phasing discussions on how this project could be phased to get it constructed and to keep everything operational throughout. So we'll talk a little bit, again, we're going to talk about that partnering and that team building, and then we'll also talk about leading the design team and how that management process helped us in approaching this large campus. We had a lot of partners on this project and required technical coordination between multiple offices. And we pursued lead certification at the silver level for this project through the campus design program. So that led to some additional challenges and opportunities. So we'll talk about that as well. Now, before I turn it over to Chad and Anna, we have one more poll question. Again, just to get an idea of who all is in the audience. You could tell us what the largest project is that you personally have worked on, whether it's under 10 million. These are construction costs. So under 10, 11 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 100, or over 100 million. We'll give you a few moments to answer that poll question. All right, so we've got a lot of folks on the webinar today that have worked on some large projects. So some of these things that we encountered, I'm sure, are things that you have encountered, and with any luck, we'll have some topics that can help all of us as we approach large projects in the future. All right, Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the project as a whole.
All right, thank you, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning if you're over on the West Coast. This is a really interesting project. One of my favorite projects in the last 5 or 10 years that I've worked on, just from the user group complexity and everything that we had to deal with on the site. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on what the project was, and then we'll get into some of that partnering stuff that Pam was talking about. So just a high-level overview. This project we finished design back in 2021. We're currently in the bid phase, so bidders are currently working on that right now. Expecting to start construction winter of 2022, and we've estimated about a 5-year construction cycle on this project. So hopefully fully occupied by spring of 2027. It's over 180,000 square feet of building design. It was essentially ended up being 5 main buildings plus all the site coordination that went with that. Like Pam said, this was a LEED Silver project, and we did go through the LEED campus approach. Background on the actual Fort Jackson campus that we're working on. This is the in one of the in-processing centers for the Army. So there's 4 facilities around the country that in-process new recruits and begin their basic training. At Fort Jackson, they see over 50% of the new recruits in the Army every year. They in-process 50,000 trainees during the course of a year. A lot of that is, I think they said 800 to 1,200 recruits a week, 46 weeks out of the year is how many recruits are going through this building. So a little background on the buildings and the campus. There is a dedicated campus for this process at Fort Jackson. It's essentially a 3-day process for the recruits as they show up. And these buildings were built back in the 1970s to handle that. So what do? They're showing up, they're getting an information download, they're getting new uniforms, they're getting haircuts, they're getting IDs, they're getting bank cards, they're getting their medical and dental screenings, they're getting shots. Sometimes some of these guys get up to 12 shots. They have dining services on this campus. They have barracks. They have a physical training track, and they're teaching these recruits how to be part of a platoon. At the end of their 3 days, they're put into a platoon and they're shipped off to the base to begin their basic training. So this isn't, when they show up, they don't immediately start basic training, although this is part of it. They spend 3 days here, then they move on to basic training. So obviously from the 1970s to now, they're seeing this number of recruits every week, every year. These facilities are just run down. They're cramped. Everything's falling apart. They're hard to maintain. So the Fort Jackson and DPW began planning about over 10 years ago on how they could refurbish this campus. So they've been doing a pretty good master plan for a long time to try and figure this out. There's 6 barracks on this campus to house these trainees. All 6 of those barracks have been or are in the process of being renovated. The main buildings on this campus, the Corps looked at it, or they decided that the Corps would be responsible for these, and they were responsible for phase 1, which was all the clothing facilities that handle the new recruits' uniforms were going to be moved to a new location out of the reception building. And the dining facility, which was pretty run down, was going to be completely renovated. So they have phase 1 scope was a temporary dining facility so they could replace the new dining facility. Phase 2 was awarded to Pond. Phase 2 is a complete renovation or new facility for the reception process, which also includes an optical lab inside that reception process. That includes the immunizations part of the medical facility. The medical facility was not in our original scope, and it included a new 300-bed barracks. So as part of our original scope, that's what we were dealing with when we first started our charrette and our program. So moving on, once we started to get into the sort of the programming phase of the project, this is when all the partnering, the coordination, the communication became really important. We started this process with a pretty comprehensive week-long charrette to talk with all these user groups, and this is who we met. So USACE, the core Charleston District, was our direct client. They're the ones in charge of this project, making sure that we delivered scope and budget and on time to get this project moving forward. From Fort Jackson's standpoint, our user groups were the reception battalion command and staff. They were in charge of the day-to-day activities, the whole campus, dining facilities, PX, optical lab, coordination of all the medical and dental screening, everything that goes on this campus, they're in charge of it. There was the medical and dental clinic users that we had to coordinate with. There are actually 2 different command staffs, so that took a lot of communication to make sure we had everything right for both of those groups. We had a Fort Jackson leadership group that would ultimately make a few decisions that went up the chain to make sure the project was going in the right direction. We had privatized and non-privatized utility providers that we had to deal with. And of course, DPW had been doing the master plan all along. So a lot of moving parts and pieces on the user group side. And then to handle this project, we put together a pretty large design team. We had over 100 people touching this project at the end of the day from our just design side. A lot of coordination there, a lot of making sure everybody's on the same page to keep this project going in the right direction. So, like I said, as we sat down to do the programming charrette, we had to kind of do a deep dive, understanding the client's needs. We'll say when we did this, it was pre-COVID, so it was nice that we actually met face to face with all these user groups to start this project. I think that really helps when you're working with a team. You're working with new users. You can sit there, look them in the eye, lay a piece of paper down on the table, and do some design and sketching, working on programs. Everything really helps. I know we've all sort of learned how to do it on Teams in the last couple of years, but nothing beats a face-to-face meeting. So we developed, as we sat down, went through that week-long charrette, we developed 3 different site options for the base. It was reviewed and decided that their preference was for the new facility would go right back where the old facility was. The way that the recruits flow through the campus, where they go get uniforms, they eat meals at the dining facility 3 times a day, and they're staying in the barracks. It just, everything pointed to that reception facility needed to stay right in the middle of the campus. Of course, that causes a lot of issues with phasing and temporary space, but that was the decision. So that's where we headed to out of our charrette. As we started to do this deep dive into what it is that this project was going to be, we had to take our design team and really start to divide and conquer. It means we had to do a lot of communication and coordination between our design team, along as well with the user groups, to make sure everybody was getting all the information everyone needed. Some of the issues we came up with as we were doing this is we're learning about what their process is, the reception process, what this Optical Lab was, and what its function was there in the building. Now that we're going to have to replace the old facility, we're going to have to provide swing space for this operation, 2 to 3 years construction cycle, but they were going to have to remain functional, still seeing 8 to 1,200 recruits a week in a temporary space. This 300-bed barracks, what was that? Why was it needed? What were the site needs? And then a lot of utility needs and telecom needs, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So one of the first things we ran across was the Optical Lab. There's an Optical Lab in the existing reception facility. They produce, they manufacture, they fabricate these eyeglasses for greater Southeast region of military installations, not just Fort Jackson, not just the recruits. That's a lot of what it is. Every new recruit that needs eyeglasses gets them, and they can get them right away. But they're sending eyeglasses all over the Southeast. So we questioned why that needed to be in the building. And then once they decided to replace the building, we said, well, we've gone and looked, and there's millions of dollars of equipment in this building, in this space. It's all highly calibrated and highly sensitive. And we think, first of all, having to move it to swing space was going to be a challenge. Trying to put that into a temporary facility and get it calibrated, and then having to move it back into the new facility was also going to be a challenge and run a high risk of damaging some of that equipment. So our opinion was this really needed to be in a standalone facility built early on, if possible. And we gave that opinion to the core and to the user groups, and we had some review sessions about that. Our second big issue was coordination with the medical facility. Currently, all these recruits, they get immunizations, they get shots, they get eye exams, dental exams, ear exams, physical exams, everything else. Most of that is done in a facility next door to the reception facility, which is also an old cramped building. But they do immunizations in the current facility. So we wanted to sort of question how all that worked. I'll let Anadis talk about the medical.
Yeah, and like Chad has been saying, and we've been talking about that, listening to the groups was so important in this programming investigation part of the project. And we absolutely had to do much more than just a week charrette to get all this information. So the calls with all the different user groups were crucial, and it was pretty much on a weekly basis where we had to call different groups in to get more information about the equipment they're using, all the FF&E packages that need to go into each one of these spaces, what kind of type of usage, when the soldiers are sometimes getting the immunization, we had to make sure that proper pouring, if there's any falls happening. So there's a lot of different coordination that had to happen. And as far as the challenging part of this is that we were getting in equipment information as we were designing it. And like we talked about, that it's crucial that we understand the operation on how the movement needs to happen throughout the spaces. So we couldn't just double the size of certain rooms when we found out certain information. So what we did is there was teaming calls pretty much every single week where we went through the challenges, looked at the floor plan changes, and kind of incorporated those inputs from all these different groups. I know that, the eye line to test, like they were kind of further than we thought. So we ran into some issues of being able to fit those into those medical areas. So what we kind of say, the communications part of this scope of work with such a large teams where we are coordinating with different engineering disciplines, the interior design. We were working with different offices throughout our pond offices. So Columbia, Jacksonville, Atlanta. And then we had, Mississippi, our design partner with the dorms. So there's a lot of information going back and forward. So having consistent teaming meetings with those information that we were receiving was a crucial part of our project. Like I said, we talked about all the different functions that we had to go through, all the different medical professionals that we would have to have interviews with. It was definitely a lot of information back and forward. So being good listeners, keeping good record of what we were getting, and then keeping that information flowing to the rest of the team was absolutely crucial part of what we did. And part of our whole packets and the design final packets that we were given is the FF&E packets as well. So getting all that information, getting those specified correctly, took a lot of additional programming than just the week that we met with all these large groups. So I would say the biggest challenge for us was to make sure that each meeting had some additional information that it affected such a large amount of groups where we were incorporating waiting area, holding areas while these recruits are going from one spot to another. So I think the biggest thing for us, as far as the teaming partner, is the communication, listening to all of our end user, and making sure that the flow of information is correct. So good PMing and good communication is a key in this aspect. Chad, did I leave any of these items out?
No, that sounds good on these. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely, and it was great work. Some of our partners, we had split up our design team on different buildings, but in our interiors group that Dis was leading, they were on every single building. So coordinating all those finishes across all those buildings was a big task. And they did a great job. One of the other opportunities or challenges that we came up against was the swing space, as we previously mentioned. So typically when we're on a project, client needs to move out of a building to some swing space. They need to move back in when they're done. We provide a specification for the contractor to provide swing space. And we're looking at a project where you've got to bring in potentially 600 recruits at one time, have them sitting on benches. Some of them may need to go over here and get haircuts. Some of them need to go get photos for IDs. Some of them need to go get shots. Some of them need to go get new uniforms. Others are going up to the medical facility. Some are going to the dining hall or the PT track. So you're going in lots of different directions. You got 1,000 troops in here a week, enlistees here, in a week, and they're parading through this building. And we just didn't think a typical swing space would be able to handle that. So we took a sort of a unique design approach on this. We worked with the Corps real closely on how this would work, because at the end of the day, this is not a government-owned building. We are not allowed to provide a building that's not in scope, that's temporary. It cannot remain on the Army base after the project is done. Even though we argued for it, we would have saved a lot of money if we had been able to leave it, and the users actually wanted us to leave it. So, write to your representatives and congressmen about that one. I understand there's nobody to maintain it, so we had a long discussion about how that works. But we could have saved taxpayers money if we could have just left the swing space. Ultimately, we came up with a design intent drawing package for swing space. You can see this wasn't the final design, but what we threw out there was some tension membrane structures, just big open spaces where they could fill in what they need. And I'm sure you've all heard this before. You go to the client, you say, look, I got this much space to put all these people into temporary conditions. So what part of the scope, what part of the program can we sort of leave out for the next couple of years? And of course, everybody knows what their answer was. None of it. You can't leave anything out. We have to be able to do all of it. So there you go, 60,000 square feet of temporary swing space. So, and this is as we're going through the bid right now, we're getting a lot of questions about this, but these are design intent. Look, here's a solution that works. We're not designing this, wasn't in our scope to design it, but we think it's needed to make this mission successful. So here's an idea of what can work. We're not going to give you all the details. You guys are going to have to do a lot of shop drawings and make this work, because this is your building contractor. You have to provide it to the government. They have to approve it. You have to maintain it during the course of construction and keep everything running. So you don't want to give them something that's going to fall apart in a year, because they might be in there for 2.5 years. But then at the end of the day, you got to take it down and put the site back the way it was. So it was a real interesting situation during design, and we'll see how it goes moving forward into construction. There was one other, as we got into the programming, we got talking with DPW and utilities, and there's a telecom hut on this campus. Well, they told us that's great, but the telecom hut is essentially full. It was never part of the 1391, wasn't in the scope, but they said really this new project isn't going to function without an additional telecom hut. So we had to include that into our design, and which also included running about, I think, 2.5 miles of fiber line. So that was a big cut into our construction budget from our original program. But our site guys were great. They made it work. We got the project moving forward, hopefully successfully. So at the end of the day, when we expressed all these opinions about some of the information we thought was maybe not a little bit lacking from the original 1391, design was ultimately paused. I know it's a little frustrating and scary for the design team. It's not something you want to happen, but at the end of the day, we thought this was the best result for the end users. They were going to get what they truly needed. Went back to Congress. They upped the budget. They upped the scope. We did contracts, and we got to start designing again, which was great. So after all that happened, this is essentially what we designed. There's a reception processing center, the main building, over 120,000 square feet. This was the 120th Reception Battalion headquarters. All the processing and reception areas involved with that process, and the medical and dental clinics were moved into the new facility. Still had the 300-bed barracks. We removed the optical fabrication laboratory, made it a standalone building. Included a new 400-meter PT track, because we were going to be putting the swing space where their old track was. They needed a general purpose storage building, the telecom building we talked about, and then the swing space to support the reception operations. So after we got through all that, we got on to phasing. So how is all this going to work? How are we going to communicate between all these users and buildings and everything else? So this part of it was just a mass communication effort here, coordination between everyone on the project. Not only do we have a phase 1 project that was critical to our project, that clothing facility and warehouse needed to move out of the reception facility before we could tear it down. The dining facility wasn't quite as critical to our operation, but they were putting in a complete temporary dining facility, tearing down the old, building new, and then moving into that. So we had to coordinate where all that was going on. They were adding some new parking, and how we had to stay away from all of that during our design. We have to build a new optical fabrication lab first. We have to get that equipment out of the building before we can demo it. We have to build a new track before we can build a swing space so that we can move the reception operation out of the building. Then we can tear it down, build a new facility, can move everybody back in, move the medical out of their facilities and in, and we have to demo the medical facility so that we can build the barracks. It was the only way to fit everything on the site. So it was like a huge, complex puzzle, a lot of coordination, like I said, a lot of communication, and just getting all that to come together and work. So that's a lot about our coordination with the users and the clients, and how everything was just highly coordinated. Again, what Pam said earlier, just listening to their needs, understanding their process, and really kind of getting in down and deep and figuring out what the best solution was going to be and making sure we were allowed to design that solution. Next part of it we wanted to talk about was more about the design team and what, how we approached this large campus project and the lead that went with it. I think we have another, oh no, we're going to do design team challenges first.
Yeah.
So after the charrette, after the programming and reprogramming, all of our design team came together. Like I said previously, we had over 100 design team members on this project. We ended up having weekly design meetings, and we would have multiple weekly design meetings. We'd have a meeting for reception, a meeting for the Optical Lab, a meeting for the barracks, a meeting for all the site coordination, not to mention our sort of weekly core meeting with the client. We would pull in user groups as needed. We had several interim design reviews, especially with the medical group, because they were not part of the original scope. So trying to scope in everything they were doing, getting all those folks to the table and really engaging in what we were trying to do, sometimes a little bit difficult. I'm sure a lot of you have worked on military projects, and just the nature of their station as folks move in and out on a 3-year cycle or a 5-year cycle, the likelihood of them being there when that project gets constructed is not high. So sometimes you get folks that, they're shipping out in, 6 weeks or 6 months, and they're not going to be there. And it's tough to get sometimes folks to engage. On the design team side, we also stress, look, everyone needs to own this project. It's a big stress here at Pond. When you're working, if you're on our team or if you're on our, one of our subcontractors, you own this part of the project. You make sure you coordinate. You don't wait for something to come to you and say, hey, do you have everything you need? You come up front and you say, hey, I need this. And make sure that gets covered as soon as possible. One of the challenges we met, of course, all this work was a lot of it was being done CAD and BIM models on the cloud on BIM 360, sharing models across multiple states, multiple offices, multiple servers. Again, like we talked about earlier, on Dis and their interiors, they were touching every single model on this project, and they're very good at making models get very large. Sorry, that was a cheap shot on it.
It's okay.
And one of the issues we ran across during the course of this project, the Accord came out and was decreed that BIM 360 wasn't secure enough for projects. They were working on some certifications and security measures to make sure that was secure enough. So we had to pull all of our BIM 360 models off the cloud and put them onto local Revit servers, which was a big challenge for us to get everybody on the project to be able to get back onto those models and keep it moving forward.
And Chad, I don't know if you wanted to mention also that through this very large project, very large design team, is that this was in the middle of, we literally experienced COVID while we were doing it. So learning how to communicate through Teams and Zoom, whatever we were going through, was quite challenging. But at the same time, I think it almost made us better because a lot of communication was able to be pulled up in front of the end users and show them what we're talking about, and that therefore they got a little bit better understanding. So even though it was challenging, I think at the end, personally, think it might have even been to our betterment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Once we all found the mute button, we were able to really, fully advance the design. And the unfortunate part, I thought, was the latter stage of the design is the review meetings all had to be done through Teams or Zoom.
Yep.
And that was very difficult to get, first of all, everyone connected into the same platform, because everybody was learning, which platforms could the government use, which ones couldn't they use. You're having to log in either through the app or through a browser. Sometimes your microphone, we all know all these issues. We joke about it all the time now. But yeah, it was right in the middle of our design process, and it definitely it interrupted it a little bit in the middle. And then I think, like Anna said, we all got better, way better, and we had a lot more communication just daily, because it's real easy to ping someone and just really annoy them on Teams until they give you what you want. So, a great
You're
point.
good at it, Chad.
So another big issue, obviously, was the site coordination on this, with multiple buildings, site improvements, swing space, building a new track, making sure. So, as it currently sits, reception is right across from the dining facility. They eat there 3 times a day. We're moving, and what you can't see on this slide is the swing space is, I don't know, 50, 60 feet in elevation lower than where the current reception building is. So they're having to, we got a little bit of flack about them having to go up the hill. And I said, isn't that part of like Army basic training, physical training? They can go up and down stairs all the time. So, but there is a lot of transition between barracks and reception facility and medical facility and clothing facility and track and swing space and dining facility. So making sure that all of that circulation stayed open during the course of construction is key, and communicating that to the contractor through our phasing documents and circulation documents that we had to create to make sure that stays open during construction. And like I said, coordination with those phase 1 plans was kind of key. Where that temporary dining facility was going to be and where the new facility was going to be under construction. We were hoping that would be under construction over the last year or two, that would be complete before we started, but that wasn't the case. They had some budget issues, and so that's just now kind of cranking up. So these 2 projects are going to be running a little bit overlapping. There's going to be a lot of construction going on this site. One of the other challenges we ran into was lead. So like we said previously, this was a lead campus design. So first of all, we have this poll question to see how many of you have been part of a lead campus certification versus just a typical lead building certification. So we take a few seconds and answer that question. Now, this was the first time I had been part of a lead campus project. So it was, for our design team, for a lot of us, it was sort of a new experience. And exactly how you do that lead checklist and how you get everyone involved on that. All right, so it looks like we have a majority of no's, but a few yeses. That's good. All right, so as we get into the lead question, Anadis, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I definitely be excited to talk. Like we said that our goal was to have a LEED Silver campus certification at the end of this. And during our charrette, we were all very excited coming out of it. We went through the scorecard and everybody had their input on, yes, I think we can go up to this and that. And we found out, that the PT track was a huge part of really putting us in extremely comfortable numbers with getting our LEED Silver certification. Further down the process, the PT track was actually taken out of our work, and therefore we could not count those points, and it was 15 points. So it became very challenging. And we all kind of jumped on a call together and tried to figure out how can we recoup these 15 points. And everybody put out their thinking hat, and some of it was just being creative. Is there any points that we can go onto the innovation and design by going above and beyond and getting some exceeding points for some of the material used and things like that. And I know electrical had to do a little bit of more research, and we ended up kind of getting it. But the exciting part for me is from interior design perspective. We had already had some very strong graphics inside of the project, and this big wall graphic that you see on here, bottom of the screen, is 20-foot tall ceilings. It's probably like 120 foot long. And so this is, as soon as you walk into the building, this is the wall that you would see. So we were able to tap into the WELL building standards under the beauty and mindful design and create throughout the buildings these graphics that create pride in the history and the display of the heritage. And so we had display cases with some artifacts, the historic artifacts that the unit has collected throughout the world. So creating kind of atmosphere that creates health and pride in what you're doing. And, these young recruits are joining one of the greatest organizations in the United States. And it used to be in a 17th building that you kind of look like, what have I done? What is going to happen to me here? But instead now they have this welcoming that's up to date. It's very much creating nice, diverse atmosphere that these graphics are creating, and it's creating the models throughout the building. So we were excited that actually became part of the lead scope as well. We also had to make sure that that we had the educational point, because like I said, we needed everything. So we do have also graphics that teach us about all these different points throughout the campus. So when you come into the lobby of each one of these buildings, we kind of tell them the story of what we're doing, of what each, all that, like, so you will see each point and what highlighted what it is. So it gave a great educational program when everybody come in. So if the recruits are standing there, they can learn something, good information about the building they're in. So again, I think that this is where the whole team had to put on their thinking hat, and we came together, and we are in good shape at this point. So I think we're
I'll
excited.
throw in there, Anna Dis was nice the way she said that. They pulled the PT track out at almost the last minute.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like 50%, hey, we're not going to do the PT track. It was, I think, a couple weeks from final submission.
Yes.
And literally one of our submissions was just go through and cross out anything that's related to the track and give it to the reviewers, and that's what we did. So it was a very last minute, very heavy involvement from everybody on the design team. Hey, let's put our heads together. How can we get all this done? And I know you don't get lead until the end of the construction project, but we feel fairly comfortable that they're on the right path to get there. So Pam, I think I'll let go.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna and Shad, for talking to us about the project. Just so that all of our listeners know, we our project manager, who did a really awesome job running this project, he retired a few months ago. So I stepped in to coordinate this webinar. I had some oversight over the project, but I really didn't have a lot of the information on the details. So I'm very thankful to Anna and Shad for stepping in to help explain everything to you all. So again, just to talk about what we talked about today, we did go over the Fort Jackson Reception Battalion Complex project, what all was included in that project, kind of the approach to it. And the focus of what we were telling you is really to show you how that partnering and teamwork works to create a successful project. It helps us navigate our challenges and our opportunities, and to manage our larger design teams to keep them all focused on a single goal. So I hope that was helpful for some of you. I believe I'm going to turn it over to Daniel now for the question and answer period.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pam. And thank you, Anna and Shad, for that presentation. So I just want to let everybody know that since we are beginning the Q&A session here, if you want to grab a copy of the slide deck, you can take a look at some of those images that they shared in a little bit more detail. And a copy of the PDA certificate has been made available from the handouts tab as well. And just a reminder for the Q&A, you can keep submitting your questions as we're going through this. So just go up to the Q&A tab at the top of your chat pane, put your questions in there. If you see a question that somebody else has asked that you really like or you want to see answered, you can click on that thumbs up icon next to it. It'll help it rise through some of the other questions so I can see it better and ask our presenters. So the first question that I had, I'll kind of throw this out. Pam, you might be the one to answer this, but I certainly appreciate anybody's input here about, so when you started, you had said that the Corps had designed phase 1 of the project in here. So what sort of coordination did you do with the Charleston and the Savannah districts when you're going from phase 1 to phase 2 of the projects? Was there any challenges with that transition, or what was that like?
All right. So really making sure that we had the correct documentation on what their plan was, and making sure that all the team members had access to that information so that we could take that into account as we move forward, I think was really key. So information sharing, I think, was the number one key to the success of navigating the process from phase 1 to phase 2. Chad, do you have anything, Chad or Anna, do you have things to add to that?
Yeah, I would say our core team was really was great. We had all those documentations of that design project. There was a lot of lessons learned passed on to us. Hey, this is the project. It's been out there. It's going to be bid, but we weren't quite pleased with how this went, or maybe how that went. But all of this stuff over here on this side of the table, we want to make sure that we kind of keep with that. All these materials, if we can use these same materials or this same feel, or some of that we had to deal with going through their documents and making sure. Specifications was a big one. Hey, let's keep the same specifications going so the project is pretty consistent.
All right, thank you. So got a couple questions coming in here from the audience, and definitely keep keep the questions coming in here, everyone. So here's one. You talked a little bit about the different methods of communication that you had employed first, some of the pre-COVID and then during COVID times. So what communication methods or tools would you say proved to be the most effective for collaboration? And, on the flip side, what would you say maybe are less effective?
Yeah, I would say on a daily basis, especially after COVID hit, we use MS Teams here, and that was just once we all figured it out, was just fantastic. We all like email because there's more of a paper trail when you're dealing with the client or the user, making sure that, hey, this was said here and that's why we did it this way. But just on a daily basis, hey, how do we get this done? How do we keep this moving? A lot of us at Pond are in one building at our headquarters, but a lot of us are also in other places. And once we all went home and we were working from our closets, hiding from our kids and our pets, it was way easier to use Teams. And I think we still use it a lot today, even though we've been back in the office for a while now. Least effective, I don't really know what was least effective.
Yeah. I think that what I add on to knowing, I was on every single team on every single building that we were on there. I think it all just depending on what kind of information we're receiving. Some of this was coordination between the disciplines, and then it could be a call and we could look at the models together. Or is it communication from the end user? Then sometimes that need to be recorded. So as long as we all were keeping the information that was being shared was the most crucial part. So if Chad had a conversation, with the dentist and he said, hey, he needs to make sure that they have these equipment in this room. And if he would have not had that well documented, interiors could have a lot of time missed some equipment that we need to coordinate, or the electrical didn't have the power or gas into those equipment. So I think it's really hard to say what tool is best, because it's all depending on what aspect it is, because there was a lot of collaboration between the disciplines, and then there was the end user and things like that. So that would be mine. It just was so varied. So as long as you documented everything well, you're in good shape.
Yeah, and I'll add, whichever platform you're using, again, we use Teams, something that we had not figured out right away. But if you make a team on Teams for that project, you can use the file component, and you can essentially have Google Docs. You can put a Word document into the Teams file, and it's a SharePoint file. Everyone can work on that document at the same time. You can go in and you can review documents. Everyone can add to a narrative. Everyone can look at a specification, whatever it might be. Obviously, design models are a little bit different, but for the daily documentation kind of stuff, meeting minutes, we can put it on there. We don't have to pass it around email to email, or put it in a folder somewhere, and you go to the folder and somebody else is using it. So you say, okay, I'll come back in 10 minutes. And then 3 days later, you're like, I was supposed to go do that. So I think that's really helpful. If you haven't figured that out yet, using that Teams team concept and putting files on there is great.
I'll add just verify the security protocols for your project before you put the files on the SharePoint.
Yes, that's fair.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So Here's another question. Anna, you might be able to answer this, but again, kind of throw it out to everybody here. What sort of design elements did you need to incorporate to include the medical and the dental clinic operations into the facilities? And how challenging was this really kind of after the conceptual designs were complete?
Well, I think both Chad and I faced this challenge very much so. So it was just gathering all the information. There are prerequisite or pre-documents that the government wants you to use in each one of those spaces. So getting those spaces, understanding what those equipment are, and then actually get the input. Is this really what you want? And getting the approval, if we had a little bit of change here and there, was kind of what we were doing. And as far as the equipment, it was so many different items that we were using in different spaces that just the coordination of all of it was a big challenge.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest on this project, as opposed to other, medical projects, is there's a lot of documentation about, what needs to be in a dental facility, what needs to be in a, optical facility, what needs to be in an audio facility. Well, what they're doing here is, the recruits come in, everyone gets an ear exam. I like to joke about this because my wife is an audiologist. We went up to visit the site. My wife has this booth that you sit in, right? And she talks to you and you do your ear exam. Well, we walked up and the first thing we saw was an audio booth with 8 seats in it. So 8 people go in at one time. They all sit down on a stool. They put their headphones on. They do their ear exam. They have 5 of those. So they're doing, 40 ear exams at the same time. The dental exams are the same way, just a basic screening, a basic optometry screening, a basic physical screening. So it wasn't your full-fledged, medical facility. It was just this basic, but then, you need dental exams. Well, we had 10 x-ray rooms because they have to get 800 troops through in a week. So it was unique trying to figure out what exactly this group needed. And then the equipment that went with it, it wasn't in our scope to provide that equipment. But we had to know what that equipment was so we could provide the right utilities, power, gas, whatever it might be at that spot. So that was a little bit of a challenge, getting the users to give us the information of exactly what x-ray machine or what they're thinking would go there.
All right, thanks, Chad. Pam, did you have anything else to add to that, or?
No, I think we summed it up. It was definitely one of our challenging part because the floor plan kept on changing until the last submittal.
Great. All right. So one question here from Donna asked about how did you partner with or choose your subcontractors for this?
So this project was awarded out of an IDIQ with the Charleston District. So we had gone into that IDIQ with specific partners. We did have to get some additional subcontractors to complete the scope. And we worked with folks that we have established relationships with. We worked with a lot of subcontractors on this one, cost consulting, geotechnical scope, commissioning. I think we did have a lead consultant, environmental consultant, some other, I'm sure I'm missing a few. I'm sorry for anybody I'm missing. So we had a lot of consultants, and again, we do have folks that we work with we've worked with for years. Occasionally, especially in a local environment, we'll look for some new subcontracting partners for specific areas of the scope. And we're always open to talk to, especially small businesses, about ways we can work together in the future.
Thanks, Pam. And then the last question here is about how did you kind of make your decision to pursue LEED Silver for that level for certification? Was that something from the product scope, or is that how did you come to that determination for it?
I'll say it wasn't a renovation. I may have misspoken there, but it was a full replacement of the building. But the LEED Silver was part of our scope. That's what we were directed to go for. And it's kind of funny because when you're putting down points on the checklist to hand back to the government, they say make sure you don't have enough points to get LEED Gold because we don't want to pay for that. This project is scoped lead silver. Make sure you hit lead silver. Don't go under, don't go over. So that was just a direction from the government.
Yeah, because in the first part of it, we were getting close to gold, and they were like, be careful. So you're not sure when we thought we were on a great little route to get silver easily. They were always warning us not to be too close to gold. But the other thing that was also very interesting, I thought, when we're doing this, because when we hit the challenge of the track that we could, lost 15 points, a lot of us like, hey, can we just buy power or buy the points kind of through commitment? But you could not commit to any of these points that commit the government to a future expenditure later. So I thought that was very fascinating too. I hadn't came across that.
All right. And then, so a follow-up question here that Roland just put in here. He said, isn't the requirement to be certifiable as lead silver, that is, you don't have to actually get the certification, you just have to meet the criteria?
I don't know the exact scope of this one. So some projects you are required to have it certifiable. Other projects do require the certification, and I don't know the exact language on this one. Do either of you?
I'm pretty sure we had to get the certification because we had to register
get the
it.
certification. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on the contractor, obviously.
Yeah.
Finish that out. But they do, when they're done, they do have to get it certified. It's been registered in USGBC.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. So I believe that is all of our questions that we have in here. So with that, so thank you, Pam, Anna, and Chad, for this great presentation. Thank you for taking the time for some fielding some questions from our audience. And thank you to all of our listeners out there for attending today's webinar. If you are interested in submitting an article to the military engineer and possibly being invited to participate in one of these Team Represents webinars, please visit our website. It has our editorial calendar and guidelines for writers. As you can see, we're currently open to submissions for our design and construction issue that will come out in November, December, and our January, February 2023 issue on environmental engineering and health and safety. So please make sure that before you leave today to download your PDH certificate from the handouts tab, and also grab a copy of the slide deck if you'd like. So on behalf of SAME, the military engineer, and our featured presenters, thank you all for joining us here today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.